American pressure over Europe relative to NATO means that United States is driving the Europe much closer to China. And we are seeing that China and Europe alliance in terms of the clean technologies or clean products. So this kind of geopolitical conflict of big super energy power. One is fossil fuel. Another one is more renewables and nuclear. What Japan and Korea should do? Should we go with US? Should we go with China and Europe? This is a big geopolitical choice for two countries.
Welcome to Smarter Markets, a weekly podcast featuring the icons and entrepreneurs of technology, commodities, and finance, ranting on the inadequacies of our systems and riffing on ideas for how to solve them. Together, we examine the questions: are we facing a crisis of information or a crisis of trust? And will building smarter markets be the antidote? This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Exchange, bringing better price discovery and risk management tools to navigate today's commodities markets through centrally cleared, physically deliverable futures contracts in energy, environmental, battery materials, and precious metals markets. Smarter markets are here.
Welcome back to Summer Playlist 2025 on Smarter Markets. I'm Dave Greeley, Chief Economist at Abax Technologies. Our guest today is Nobuo Tanaka, former Executive Director at the International Energy Agency. We'll be discussing how the energy trilemma of balancing energy security, affordability, and environmental sustainability is shaping the energy and geopolitical landscape facing Japan and Korea, and what it means for the future of LNG and nuclear power. Hello, Tanaka-san. Welcome to Smarter Markets.
Thank you. I'm very much welcome, and I'm glad to be invited.
We met a few years ago at the Japan Energy Summit in Tokyo, which is a terrific event, and I've really been looking forward to having you here as our guest on Smarter Markets ever since then. I mean, you've had a very long and distinguished career in energy, including serving as the executive director of the International Energy Agency. And I wanted to start off by asking you, it's been roughly 15 years since you were the executive director of the IEA. And I was curious how you've seen the energy landscape and energy policy concerns and conversation change over that period since you led the IEA.
Yeah, but that's a very good question. Certainly, the energy sphere has changed since I left. And one of the points is that I started the so-called comprehensive energy security, the energy issues when IEA was created after the first oil shock. It's about the petroleum. Petroleum supply stability is the heart of the energy security. So building the strategic stockpile for the member governments and sharing it in case of emergency. That was a mission of the IEA. But because of the shock we experienced by the supply disruption, the countries got prepared by reducing the oil consumption, by conservation or energy efficiency, and also moving away from oil to more using the natural gas, coal, and at the same time, nuclear power. And currently, one of the way to switch away from oil is using more the renewable energy sources, the modern renewables like solar or wind. And this is because of the concern about the climate change issues, global warming. So the energy has certainly contributed the global warming by emission of carbon dioxide. So that factor changed the energy policy dramatically. And the current recommendations or scenarios the IEA created went very, very much to the greener side of the energy perspective. So yeah, in fact, because of the security issue is getting more serious after the geopolitical changes in the world, the Russian invasion to the Ukraine, the Middle East, disturbances. So the security issue is still very much of the concern of many of the world countries. But together with climate change mitigation, the challenge for the energy sector in IEA is very much complex and very much more difficult than the time when I was the executive director. So Fatih Birol, the current executive director, is trying very hard to engage the leaders of the global community, the countries, prime ministers, presidents. But certainly, he is the superman in this sector. But I think it is a tough job for him also to have a consensus and collaboration among different players, and geopolitics make it more and more difficult.
It certainly is a challenge. Today people often refer to energy policy and frame it in terms of the energy trilemma. So, one more than a dilemma, I guess, describing that challenge that you mentioned of balancing those very important priorities of having energy be secure, affordable, and environmentally sustainable. And that mix really varies based on each part of the world. We've seen in the United States, very natural resource rich in terms of oil and gas production. So, producing oil and gas makes our energy more secure and affordable for us here in the United States. For China, which doesn't have much oil and gas production on its own, it's been more coal and renewables. So, moving into renewables has also gone along with making their energy supply more secure. In Europe, we've seen a big swing back towards prioritizing energy security over energy sustainability following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How would you characterize the state of the energy trilemma in both Japan and in Korea, which are, of course, large energy importers? Or how are these three competing priorities of security, affordability, and sustainability being weighed and balanced and prioritized in Japan and Korea today?
This is a very important question, David. And certainly, Japan and Korea are very similar energy situation. We don't have natural resources at all. And at the same time, renewable energy sources very limited because of weather, because of the geographic situation. We suffer a lot of the challenges of energy security as well as climate change mitigation, because it's very much of the challenge and how to reduce the cost for security, sustainability, and affordability. So certainly, Korea and Japan tried very hard at the time of when I was executive director of the IEA. I really thank Korea because Korea is the first country who supported my candidacy to the IEA's executive director, because IEA was main part of the IAs or European countries. Much more than half are Europeans, and non-Europeans is just the Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and United States, and Mexico. So to become the executive director, Korean support is really must. And I'm always thankful to them that Korea is the first country who supported me for being elected as executive director. The first time and the second time also when I tried to be reelected again, and Korea was the first country to support it. By the way, United States is the last. They always take a position to be a decisive power of the election. So first time they supported me, the second time they didn't. But anyway, this Japan-Korea collaboration in the energy sector when I was the executive director of the IEA, very, very strong. And I really thankful for their support. By the way, Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, was the foreign minister when I was elected. And when I met him in several occasions in the summit meeting, etc., UN meeting, he always told me, Mr. Tanaka, I decided support for you in Korean government, and I always appreciated him for his decision. But Korea is, in a way, another similarity between Korea and Japan is we are both the nuclear user, very peaceful nuclear user. So without nuclear power, energy security cannot be achieved. So Korea has developed many light water reactor. Japan did, but after Fukushima, certainly Korea is much more ahead of us of using nuclear power. So in a way, sustainability, yes, nuclear is the way to reduce carbon emission, limited use of renewables, and also the Japan, Korea using the liquefied natural gas together. I mean, about more than 50 years ago, Japan started importing liquefied natural gas from Alaska, and Korea follows through. And because natural gas is much cleaner than coal or oil as a fossil fuel. So, and supply is much more diversified because oil is very much concentrated to the Middle East or Russia. So natural gas is very much Australia. It can be Indonesia. It is much now in the United States typically. So it's very well diversified. So for the sake of security and sustainability, natural gas was a very important element for the Japanese diversity and sustainability. So Korea, Japan, and also Taiwan comes after as a major user of the liquefied natural gas, and we successfully commoditize it. At the beginning, it was very expensive to liquefy it and transport by the special ship and burn and regasify it and burn in the power sector. So we did a big transformation of the gas sector with that. So the pipeline was very expensive for us and very difficult for us to build that. The reason why we went to the liquefaction. But after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, liquefied natural gas is getting very popular. The Europe needs much more liquefied natural gas than the pipeline gas. So the United States is a big supplier, and African, Middle East countries also exporting liquefied natural gas to Europe. So Asian countries suffer because of the high prices of the gas after the Europeans switch from Russian pipeline gas to the liquefied natural gas. So we do a lot together to make our energy system more sustainable and at the same time more secure supply, and try our best to make it affordable. So our effort together is certainly contribute the global energy system, which we now have, but we have to do much, much more facing, as you mentioned, about the challenge between the geopolitical situation of the current global community. The US is moving more to the fossil fuel based policy, like President Trump's drill, baby drill, is exactly the energy security policy of the US of using the much more affordable and plentiful fossil fuels, while China is the kind of opponent for this direction by using more and more renewable energy sources and nuclear. They try to reduce the use of fossil fuel. And this fossil fuel use means more importation from Middle East or from Russia or from United States. So China's policy is exactly energy security. While US policy is energy security also, but US is seems to me that make a more coalition with Russia, with Middle East. Also, the Saudi Arabia is typical. The Saudi host that meeting for US and Russia to talk together for Ukraine peace. Mr. Trump, at the first his presidency, he intervened to the conflict between Mohammed bin Salman and President Putin. In after the COVID-19 situation, they made a big fight of the oil price, oil production cartelization, and the Saudi penalized the Russia because they didn't agree with the reduction of the production of oil. and the price went to the negative in the spot market. So at that time, Trump invaded to make a kind of a bridge between Mohammed bin Salman and Putin. So they are, in a way, coalition of the fossil fuel countries. So fossil fuel countries coalition, and in a way, the American pressure over Europe relative to NATO means that United States is driving the Europe much closer to China. And we are seeing that China and Europe alliance in terms of the clean technologies or clean products. So this kind of geopolitical conflict of big super energy power. One is fossil fuel. Another one is more renewables and nuclear. What Japan and Korea should do? Should we go with US? Should we go with China and Europe? This is a big geopolitical choice for two countries to consider very seriously and to make our way out. I'm always saying there are winners and losers in this game of energy security and sustainability. Yes, for the sustainability sake, we need more renewables and nuclear. But for the security, we have to depend also on the natural gas in the foreseeable future. So we have to take very clever decision and making collaboration with different players together. That's what we are facing in Japan, Korea, in the same boat. And even with the change of the presidency in Korea, there are lots of common agenda we have to do together.
And I'd love to dig into the point that you raised that traditional renewables, solar, wind, aren't a big option for Japan and Korea, that it's much more, the future is looking more and more like liquefied natural gas and nuclear. For people who aren't as familiar with Japan and Korea, why is it difficult to do the more traditional renewables there, and how limited is it?
Yeah, we can say it's a modern renewables, David, because of the solar and wind. Traditional renewables means hydropower or biomass. But anyway, for these modern renewables, simply geology or geographic situation of Korea and Japan, very limited of the flatlands, and sea is very deep. So having the solar and or using more the windmills, I think there are certain limitations, geographical limitations. So we have to use as much as possible, of course. So Japan is using solar power so much, and now expanding our capacity in the floating windmills surrounding Japan, EEZ, and Korea is also trying to do that. But certain there is a geographical limitation. So we cannot rely on the renewables like Europe. So we have to go more to the collaboration in the nuclear. And also another, let's say, element which we can do together is hydrogen. Hydrogen, because the domestic price of renewables is very high for both Korea and Japan, maybe importing green or blue hydrogen, means decarbonized hydrogen from other country, may make sense, as this is the same kind of scenario or story of importing liquefied natural gas. Liquefied natural gas is very expensive at the beginning, but by expanding the scale and volume, the cost is being reduced and now commoditized after 50 years. So if we invest now to the supply chain of green or blue hydrogen or ammonia. Ammonia is another way of transportation of the clean hydrogen. Another way is liquefied hydrogen and also MCH, organic hydrate. This is another way of transporting hydrogen. But if we can make value chain of supply chain of clean hydrogen, but either way, maybe we can reduce decarbonization of the very much harder to abate sectors or industrial sectors in Japan and Korea, like steel, cement, petrochemicals. Maybe we can reduce the carbon emission of these sectors by importing affordable, clean hydrogen in the future. So that is another, let's say, big collaboration Japan and Korea should do in the future for using more renewables in the other part of the world. If hydrogen can be produced, like Chile, for example, Chile has a huge potential wind sources. So if we can make a hydrogen or clean ammonia there and importing, yeah, we may have a very good way of clean fuel for our hard to abate sectors. Another opportunity is, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they are investing into the solar power, and there are plenty of cheap solar power there, and they can make clean hydrogen from the solar power, or they can use the so-called CCS, the carbon capture and storage from their natural gas or oil. And we call it blue hydrogen. And blue hydrogen can be exported also from them to us or to Europe. And these are the potential supply chain. And Asian countries need a very similar project because they have many of the hard to abate sectors, steel mills, cements, chemicals, much younger than the developed economies like in Europe or Japan. So they have to continue to use the thermal power, coal thermal power, or using more coal in heating their hard to abate sectors. If we start using blue or green ammonia or hydrogen to reduce carbon emission in these Asian harder to abate sectors, yeah, they may have the start using the hydrogen there. So by doing so, I mean, Japan is initiating the so-called AZEC, Asian Zero Emission Community, by promoting the idea of hydrogen supply chain as well as CCS, carbon capture storage supply chain, bringing back some of the carbon dioxide emitted in Japan to Malaysia, Indonesia, and sequestrate it in underground. Then that may have a certain value. Maybe it could happen also in Saudi Arabia or Middle East because they have lots of depleted oil field or gas field to be used for CCS. Yes, these oil producing countries, they get the value by taking the sources from underground and sell it as a oil or gas. That is the current model of their value. But future value may be just sequestrate the carbon emission and store it underground the other way around. Storing this carbon dioxide underground has a value. If that's the case, certainly even with this decarbonization, Middle East countries or oil producers, oil suppliers has a future. This is not the end of their country, but they have the new value for decarbonization using their depleted oil fields. So I think this kind of new paradigm may help Japan and Korea as a big trader of carbon dioxide as well as clean hydrogen or ammonia. So that is that for the trading country like Japan and Korea. I think this new clean hydrogen, clean ammonia, and carbon dioxide trade may have that new role, and we may survive by introducing this kind of supply chain together.
And it's very interesting to think of Japan can be an importer of LNG. It can, in effect, be an importer of renewable power through green and blue hydrogen and ammonia. In terms of domestic production, it seems like it's really about nuclear power generation, which you've been a strong proponent of. Of course, the biggest challenge nuclear power has faced is public acceptance. Recently in the United States, the big tech companies have been clearing the path for public acceptance of a nuclear power renaissance. Japan, of course, has a uniquely traumatic experience with nuclear energy, from the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the more recent accident at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So I wanted to ask you, given that history, how difficult do you think it will be for Japan to accept increased nuclear power generation? And how do you try to convince the Japanese public that this is the right path forward?
Yes, David, this is the most important and difficult question for us to overcome. We have been, we means, officials in METI and energy industries and nuclear providers, utilities. We have been trying to convince Japanese public after the Fukushima accident. Of course, Hiroshima Nagasaki is one of the reasons for the skeptics about the nuclear power. But after the Fukushima accident, it is so difficult that even the TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Company, who is very much of the excellent electric supplier utility company, but they even TEPCO made such a huge mistake. It's a human error happened in Fukushima. So how we can say we are now the safe nuclear power? It is very difficult after Fukushima to convince Japanese public nuclear power is okay, because we have been saying so much that nuclear power is safe, cheap, and clean. But after Fukushima, it's very expensive now because of the safety requirements is very much required by the nuclear regulatory agency, which is built after the Fukushima accident. Lots of the measures should be taken to reduce the risk. High walls are requested to build facing the ocean. So all of these costs made a tremendous increase of the cost. So it's not cheap, no longer cheap. Because of this accident, we can no longer say it's safe. And is it clean? Because of the Fukushima accident, certain emission of the nuclear materials caused huge problems in Fukushima and the surrounding area. So no longer clean. So our narrative of clean, cheap, and safe electricity, we cannot use anymore. So we have to have a new narrative for the nuclear power. So I created the working group in the Canon Institute of Global Studies and that tried to ask this group what the nuclear power should be in the future to overcome Fukushima as well as Hiroshima, Nagasaki trauma. I made a group of ladies, except me, I'm the chair, but all other members are women in this group because women are much more serious about the risk. And the men, in the other way, are not so risk conscious from my experience. I had a very interesting experience with one lady. She created the security recommendation company in Japan only with women. So they created this company and recommending to the clients what company is profitable and what else. Social responsibility investment or make a certain ranking of the companies by the sustainability. And the president of the company, she's a very good friend of mine, told me that she stopped recommending TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Company, just half year before that accident. And I asked, why you stopped recommending? She said, well, they keep all the accidents or mistakes or reporting of these mistakes and accidents of all companies. And Tokyo Electric, as she said, repeated the same mistakes and never changed the system. And that's the reason why she stopped recommending TEPCO to the clients just half a year before the accident. So clients say, well, why should we sell the debt or Tokyo Electric debt and shares? They're a very good, excellent company. But reluctantly, they sold all of their holdings of bond as well as shares. And just half a year later, they found they are such a great success of selling out. And she wondered why other company didn't do that. So that gave me a very interesting idea. I thought, it's because you are lady My wife, she remembered all of my mistakes since our marriage and reminds me of them from time to time. To be very interesting story is that when I saw the special program of TV programs of NHK, that's a Japanese public broadcasting, they explained about the brains of men and women are developed differently vis-a-vis risks. Men are always going out of family and go out for hunting, the beast, mammals, animals. So if you remember all the mistakes you made and if you are considering all the risks, you can never go out for hunting. You are scared to go out. But on the other hand, women staying at home and keep the children safe and family members safe. So for them, brain remembers all the mistakes and risks of the family. So these hundreds of thousands of years, we are developed, our brains are differently developed so that women are much more conscious about the risks. So I said, okay, maybe if TEPCO as president were a woman in 2011, maybe she could have avoided that accident. And also, if TEPCO wants to restart Kashiwazaki carrier plant, it is in the plant in the Fukushima, same boiling water reactors. If they want to restart it, maybe just make a president a woman and move the headquarters to Kashiwazaki carrier. Because Finland's Olkiluoto nuclear power, the headquarters is in the plant. The Korean KHNP has a headquarters very close to the plant. So the closeness of the headquarters to the nuclear power plant is certainly help the acceptability of the public to the nuclear power. And women's presidency may make it much more strong case for basic company concerned about the security of the operation. So I recommended this to the president of Tokyo Electric Power some time ago. He said, well, maybe, but he hasn't done the decision yet. But Japan Airlines president is woman already. Yes, because they want to show that Japan Airline is very much concerned about the safety of the clients. Why not for the Tokyo Electric Company? So I made this group in Canon Institute, and they recommended 3 things to make nuclear power acceptable to the Japanese public. The first is minimizing the risk of accident by the small modular reactor with passive safety features. Its technology is very possible to make it much more safer. And if the core of the nuclear power is small enough, you can limit the EPZ, means emergency planning zone, within the plant site. So you doesn't have to bother about the people surrounding residents. And if the regulatory commission say that, the American nuclear power company like NuScale saying that their license by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is such that EPZ is limited within the plant. So this is the reason why I think there are lots of small modular reactor concept is now developed in the United States and being tested, not as a for the big utilities, but for the data centers or even for the chemical plants. So this kind of dedicated power, decarbonized power source for the different industrial use is what United States is starting to do. I'm really looking forward to see that happen. By the way, the second condition these ladies that put us on the table is how to take care of the radioactive waste. This is a huge problem in Japan too, where we will dispose. The current spent fuel is stored in the nuclear power plant itself, as well as some part in the Rokkasho reprocessing plant. But Japanese government is trying to identify the final disposal site in Japan, but not yet decided. There are 2 places in Hokkaido, one in Kyushu. Now saying for the some kind of starting some study. We hope we will find the final disposal site sometime, but politically it is very difficult, unfortunately. So I think the current system of disposal may not work. So we are proposing with these ladies, there are some technology which can reduce the toxicity of the radioactive waste much shorter in the period of reduction of radioactivity, such that usual spent fuel of light water reactor needs about 300,000 years to be safe as natural uranium. But this technology make it 300 years. 300 years is long, but it comes within the human control period. 300,000 years. I don't know if humanity may survive as long as 300,000 years, but 300 years, maybe. I think we can manage it somehow. And this technology may be applicable to the meltdown fuel debris of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Debris is very highly radioactive. To dispose it directly, we need a place for 300,000 years, just like spent fuel. And it cannot be transported out of Fukushima. Of course, no prefecture will accept such kind of debris for disposal. So it should be treated and disposed in Fukushima. So if we use this technology in Fukushima and reduce this toxicity substantially to the 300 years, maybe we can find a place which could be the current the Fukushima nuclear power plant number 1 or number 2 to be used as a site for reprocessing and reducing toxicity to the level of 300 years. And already technology existed. That is American technology, David. It is called Integral Fast Reactor, developed by the Argonne National Laboratory of Chicago and already tested in the Idaho National Laboratory. This pyroprocessing technology is existing and can be applicable at any time. And meltdown debris of 3 Mile Island accident is stored in Idaho National Laboratory. Maybe they are waiting for the future possibility of treatment of this debris by this integral fast reactor or pyro reprocessing, chemical reprocessing of spent fuel. So I think this technology can be used for Fukushima, and this technology can help Japanese nuclear facilities to find the final disposal site, even at the nuclear power plant site. This is a different concept of the current disposal method, but the current nuclear plant site is relatively stable in terms of geological structure. It can be stored for 300 years in the nuclear power plant. So this is the second point. And the third element which these ladies say was to avoid the risk of nuclear war. In Hiroshima, Nagasaki, we experienced, so we have to keep the nuclear technology only for the peaceful purposes. And current light water reactor needs enrichment. Enrichment is just as Iranian government is doing it. It can produce weapon grade enriched uranium by enrichment. Of course, regular power plant do not need that highly enriched uranium, just 5%, 6% kind of thing. But still, if the technology is obtained by some country, it can be used for the weapon grade enrichment of the uranium. So this is the issue. And also, reprocessing of the spent fuel of the light water reactor is the way to get pure plutonium for the bomb. So light water reactor, which is very current paradigm of the global nuclear power, is very much proliferation prone in the way of enrichment, in the way of reprocessing, they are very close to the weaponization technology. So this Idaho or Argonne National Laboratories, IFL, is considered to be a very proliferation resistant, because one reason is that this integral fast reactor is combined together the reactor, fast reactor, and reprocessing plant together in one plant. The plutonium is not transported out of the plant, which is feasible to the, say, terrorist attack for the seizure. So this is, in a way, safer than the regular system of transportation of spent fuel or plutonium or enriched uranium. Another reason is that this technology cannot get the pure plutonium from the spent film, because this technology, pyroprocessing, make it very difficult to get the pure plutonium out of the spent film, because the minor actinide, which is very radioactive material, will be separated together with the plutonium. So that makes the terror, if that some country try to get the plutonium out, this technology prevent them to get the pure plutonium for the bomb. So for this chemical pyroprocessing process is making it much more difficult than the regular, say, reprocessing technologies to get the pure plutonium. So because of these three reasons, we strongly recommend to work together with Japan and Korea, with the United States, to make this integral fast reactor of the Idaho for the future model of proliferation resistant nuclear technology. Korea has already asked to the US government to work together at Idaho National Laboratory. This pyroprocessing is proliferation resistant. They made a study together for about 10 years already and showing this is proliferation resistant, because Korea needs this technology to reduce toxic waste. They have the same problem of Japan here, where to dispose the radioactive waste. And because of that, they want to use this technology to make the wasteful 300-year thing, just as same as Japan. So they try to ask the permission license from the US, but US doesn't say yes to them, because Korea has a close neighbor, North Korea, who has already the weapon, but the use of this technology is using plutonium. So if this technology is transported to the North Korea, helps North Korea to have more weapon of plutonium, but they have already the plutonium weapon. So I think now it is a time for the US to license South Korea to use this technology for the waste clarification. So Japan and Korea and the United States may work together of using this technology for better, peaceful use of the nuclear power. By the way, President Trump's recent executive order for the nuclear power include the use of this technology for the sake of energy security, because currently the US depends 40% of enrichment services of uranium on Russia. So reducing the reliance or dependence of enriched uranium on Russia to using the plutonium in the spent fuel of all over the US nuclear power plant is a very good idea. Just using this plutonium by reprocessing and make it the fuel to the fast reactor, this may significantly reduce the use of enriched uranium from Russia. So for the sake of fuel security, I think your President Trump is moving that direction. So I think Korea, Japan, and the United States may develop this technology, a peaceful technology of the future, and make a model for other regions in other Asian countries like Vietnam or Indonesia, or even for Iran. If Iran decided to give up the weaponization, Iran could be invited to the joint development of this technology with Japan and Korea and the United States. I think that by doing so, we can carefully monitor and observe the peaceful use in Iran together. So this kind of this technology of the US can be used as a huge leverage for the peaceful use of the world, and also it can help Japan take care of the meltdown debris of the Fukushima, together with Japan, Korea, US collaboration, and to overcome the Japanese public, the trauma of Fukushima and trauma of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think we are at a very interesting time of a crossroad of the nuclear technology, and I am promoting this is the way that we should proceed for the future of the nuclear power, David.
Thank you very much for that. I think it sounds like for public acceptance, the future of nuclear energy is going to be different than the past of nuclear energy, different technology, different implementation to make it safer, cleaner, and more peaceful in its application. Since you've come out with these recommendations, what's been the response from, say, industry in Japan or the public utilities in Japan?
Japanese government considered this is one of the options for the future nuclear technology. So they are considering what is the future beyond of the nuclear, and there are very many different types of the advanced system. One is they call it advanced light water reactor. The second is small floating reactor. And the third is this fast reactor with metallic fuel and pyroprocessing. That is one of their options. Another one is the fusion reactor, and also high temperature gas reactor, which Japan has a pilot plant in ORI is another one. So there are many different technologies. Industry, utilities, very much interested in the large light water reactor, which is modified a little bit for the safety side, like core catchers or other equipment to be as a model to replace the old large light water reactor. So the Kansai Electric, especially very much just a couple of days ago, publicized the idea of using this technology to replace old reactor in Mihama in Fukui Prefecture. I don't know if this goes or not, but the cost is still very high. The large light water reactor, because of the safety requirements, it cost more than 10 billion US dollars. So it's not, in terms of the cost, this means if they may build it, but it may mean the higher electricity prices for Japanese users. And this technology also may not be internationally competitive because the cost is too expensive relative to Russian model VVER or Chinese model of Chinese light water reactor, and Korean light water reactor is also very competitive. So if Japanese utility builds simply, they want to build it because it's simply the same model of the old light water reactor, so they are accustomed to using it, and also regulatory processes using it for the sake of ease of deployment. They just want to use this technology, but unfortunately, it's not internationally acceptable. So I'm not so sure it's a good idea to go that direction. Rather, as I said, we have to go to the small modular reactor, which should be cheaper in the new regulatory system. And if it's going to be built in a scale, it could be much more safer and cheaper. Because just, David, if you think about the regular manufactured goods like automobile or camera or small computers, yeah, they are built in a volume, in a kind of comprehensive licensing with one acceptable model of safety. All the other models which they produce under the same license are given the safety standard. Match the safety standard by the regulator. And the cost will come down because of the volume of the production. And also the safety increase. The current light water reactor model is just build one by one and regulated by one in a different, let's say, standard. And that is very costly. And unfortunately, it's not getting safer. So I think nuclear reactor should change the paradigm to be the real future, because very interesting chart exists. The IEA says that big light water reactor in France, in Olkiluoto, Finland, or Vogtle in the US, the construction period was doubled or tripled, and the cost is doubled and tripled. The French model, or the old model of their reactors, there are only two types, 1.4 gigawatts or 0.9 gigawatt. And just repeat these key pressurized water reactors all over France. So the cost is kept very low relative to the US models or Japanese models. So standardization is the answer for maintaining the cost of reactors. So I think that small modular reactor is the answer. So I really want to know that the United States will succeed in deploying the small modular reactor for the data centers, for the AIs, for industrial use as a dedicated source of clean electricity. Then the Japanese utilities or Japanese steel mills or data centers may start thinking about, this is a model for the future, and introducing to Japan. Japanese regulators, unfortunately, are not innovative enough to start this type of new experiment in Japan. They are the followers. So if the US or Europe start using substantially these small modular reactors in their field, then our utilities or our industries may think differently. One very interesting case could be Nippon Steel. Nippon Steel purchased US Steel in the United States and investing tens of billions of dollars. And I urge them to test some of the small modular reactor technology in Pittsburgh and producing green steel there. And then come back to Japan as a experiment succeeded in the US thanks to the Japanese investment, and introduce back to Japan of this small modular reactor for steel mill. That kind of creative thinking or innovative thinking is necessary for the success of small modular reactors in the future. And I really want to see that happen in the United States.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. Really appreciate this conversation and you sharing your perspectives and experience and your recommendations for the future of energy. Before you go, for our summer playlist, we like to ask each of our guests what's on their, quote, beach reading list this summer. But before I do that, I want to note that your daughter, Saki Tanaka, is both an author and an illustrator whose recent book is titled Between Words, A Friendship Tale. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about her book.
Thank you, David, for that's most important for me. This book is about a boy and a father who traveled around the world and facing the challenge of different cultures or in a different society. And this small boy was facing the challenge to have a new friend without knowing the language. So because my life, the real life, I stationed in the United States twice, Washington, D.C., in the embassy twice, and in Paris 3 times. So half of my career in the METI, I stayed outside of Japan. I always bring my family together with me. And my daughter, Saki, she speaks perfect English, perfect French, and she overcome this problem of different culture so easily. Wonder why maybe the kids are so easy to take care of this difference and live happy life with different culture and different, but not true, because when I read this book, the boy suffered a lot of communication gap with his friends, but with difficulties at some moment with some different situation, this boy find a way of communicating with a girl who do not speak any language, but just communicating with friendship with different way of communication. So, wow, that means yes, the Saki suffered a lot. Even I thought she didn't, but she actually suffered, but she knew. She found out how to overcome this difference from her experience. So I really admire her in a way that she made her case of communication gap by her book and tried to tell the story to the young kids how to cooperate and how to communicate with his or her friends. So that's a reason why I recommend everybody who listens to me to read the Saki Tanaka's Between Words if you want to make your kids more international and global, because the current problem in the world is very global. The way of climate change is one, the potential risk of nuclear war is one, and the challenge of AI or data center is another global challenge. So to overcome these difficult global issues, we need globally oriented politicians or globally oriented people. So I really want the young people to have a global identity or global sense. And I sincerely hope this Saki's book of Between Words may contribute to raise your kids into that direction. That's my final words for you, David. Thank you very much for picking up this book for me.
Thanks again to Nobuo Tanaka, former executive director at the International Energy Agency. We hope you enjoyed the episode. This concludes our series, Summer Playlist 2025. We'll be back next week with our new podcast series, Catching Up on Climate, where we'll be discussing the state of the climate, energy transition, and carbon markets going into Climate Week New York City 2025. We hope you'll join us.
This episode is brought to you in part by Abax Exchange, bringing better price discovery and risk management tools to navigate today's commodities markets through centrally cleared, physically deliverable futures contracts in energy, environmental, battery materials, and precious metals markets. Smarter Markets are here. Contact sales at abax.exchange to get started. That concludes this week's episode of Smarter Markets by Abax. For episode transcripts and additional episode information, including research, editorial, and video content, please visit smartermarkets.media. Please help more people discover the podcast by leaving a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. Smarter Markets is presented for informational and entertainment purposes only. The information presented on Smarter Markets should not be construed as investment advice. Always consult a licensed investment professional before making investment decisions. The views and opinions expressed on Smarter Markets are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the show's hosts or producer. Smarter Markets, its hosts, guests, employees, and producer, Abax Technologies, shall not be held liable for losses resulting from investment decisions based on informational viewpoints presented on Smarter Markets. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week.